I moved into the house at the end of March. It wasn't much, just a small, one-story place on the edge of town, tucked between identical suburban homes with neatly trimmed lawns. I'd been looking for a quieter life after years of city noise. And this neighborhood seemed perfect. Calm, clean, safe. The kind of place where nothing ever happened. At least, that's what I thought. The backyard was my favorite part, a modest stretch of grass, surrounded by an old 6-foot wooden fence, with a porch swing facing a thin strip of woods behind the property. It wasn't dense, just a narrow patch of trees separating my house from the row of homes beyond. During the day, sunlight spilled through the leaves, birds nested on branches, and the air smelled faintly of pine. But at night, that same tree line looked different. Black, shadowed, still. On my third week there, it happened. It was a Friday night, a little past 11. I was sitting outside on the swing, sipping coffee and scrolling on my phone, when a strange chill settled over me. It wasn't from the weather, it was something instinctive, a deep shift in the atmosphere. I took my earbuds out and sat still, listening. That's when I heard it. Rustling. Soft, careful, deliberate. Coming from the far right corner of the yard, where the fence curved into the trees. I froze, holding my breath, ears straining. It didn't sound like an animal. There was weight behind the steps, and the spacing was wrong. Whoever, or whatever, was moving out there wasn't scurrying. It was pacing. I leaned forward, eyes fixed on the fence line. The moonlight barely reached that far, but for a split second, I could have sworn I saw movement. A shadow, tall and narrow, slipping between the gaps in the panels. Then it was gone. I waited, heart pounding in my ears, but the sound stopped just as suddenly as it had started. The silence that followed was heavier than before, pressing down on me like the air itself was holding its breath. I finally stood, forcing a laugh to shake off the unease. Probably a neighbor's kid cutting through the woods. Or maybe a stray dog. I told myself that, but when I went back inside, I checked the locks on every window and door. Twice. By the following Tuesday, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. New house, new surroundings, of course. Every sound felt louder out here, but deep down knew better. The next strange thing happened after a late-night rainstorm. When I stepped out onto the porch the following morning, I noticed footprints. Bare, human footprints. They led from the tree line straight to the edge of the porch and stopped. The soil was soft and dark from the rain, and there was no mistaking it. Someone had been standing just outside my back door. I stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. Then, pretending to be calm, I grabbed my phone and snapped a few photos. That night, I texted my neighbor, an older man named Carl, who lived 2 houses down. "Hey, have you noticed anyone wandering around the yards at night?" I asked. "Not that I've seen," he replied, "but keep your gate locked. Kids like to sneak through sometimes." I did exactly that. Every evening, I double-checked the latch on the gate before bed. But 2 nights later, I found it open. Again. That was when I started staying up later, sitting on the porch in the dark, listening. One evening around midnight, I finally saw it. A tall figure standing perfectly still near the far right corner of the fence, exactly where I'd heard the footsteps that first night. I stared at it, willing my eyes to adjust, but the shadow swallowed most of its details. I couldn't make out a face, just the shape of a person, tall, unmoving, silent. I stood, gripping the porch railing. "Hello," I called out. The shape didn't move. I blinked, and in that split second, it was gone. The silence after that was suffocating. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded wrong. Every distant noise outside made me sit up straight, heart racing. And as I lay there, half awake, I started to feel something I couldn't explain. The overwhelming certainty that someone was standing outside my bedroom window, just beyond the glass. The next day, I bought a security camera and installed it above the back door, angled directly toward the yard. That night, I sat on the couch, phone in hand, live feed open. The camera's infrared mode cast everything in shades of gray, turning the yard into a washed-out, ghostly version of itself. For hours, nothing happened. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock. 2. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off to sleep with the phone still in my hand. At 3:12 a.m., the motion alert went off. I opened the feed and froze. There was a man standing in the center of my yard. Tall, thin, completely still. He was facing the camera directly, his head tilted slightly down, but I couldn't make out his face. Just shadows where his eyes should have been. I scrambled for my phone and called 911. The dispatcher kept me on the line until 2 officers arrived, sweeping the backyard with flashlights. But when they searched, there was nothing. No footprints. No signs of forced entry, nothing disturbed. "He's not here," one of the officers said. "Probably some neighborhood kid trying to mess with you." I showed them the video, but they dismissed it quickly. "It's dark," they said. "Could be shadows playing tricks." I knew better. That night, I turned every light in the house on and sat awake until dawn. I kept refreshing the feed, over and over. But the yard stayed empty, almost too empty, like he was waiting for me to let my guard down. I didn't sleep for 2 nights straight. Every little sound set my nerves on edge. By the 3rd night, I was exhausted, but I forced myself to stay awake, keeping watch from the living room window. At exactly 2:47 a.m., I heard it. The backyard gate, creaking open, slowly, deliberately. I grabbed the flashlight and crept toward the back door, forcing myself to breathe quietly. When I stepped onto the porch, the yard was silent. Nothing moved. The gate was wide open, swinging slightly in the cold night air. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the grass, the trees, the fence. No one was there, but when I turned back toward the house, my heart stopped. The back door. It was open. I knew I'd locked it. Fresh, muddy footprints led from the doorframe into the kitchen. I followed them inside, my breath shaky, every nerve screaming at me to run. The prints stopped in the hallway, and then nothing. No sound, no movement, just silence. And that's when everything went dark. I moved into the rental home in late April. It was a small place, 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, and a fenced backyard that backed up against my neighbor's property. I wasn't expecting much, just something affordable and quiet after leaving the chaos of the city. My neighbor, Thomas, was an older man, maybe in his early 60s. He kept to himself. The first time I met him, he was trimming his hedges, wearing heavy gloves despite the heat. He barely looked up when I introduced myself, just muttered a quick afternoon before going back to work. But what really caught my attention wasn't Thomas. It was his shed. It stood at the far corner of his backyard, tucked behind some overgrown bushes. Unlike most sheds, this one had no windows, no vents, nothing. Just heavy, weathered wood and a thick door reinforced with 3 steel chains and a deadbolt. I asked him about it once, casually, while we were both outside watering our yards. "That's quite a setup you've got on that shed," I said, nodding toward it. "You keeping gold bars in there or something?" He froze for half a second before replying. "Old tools," he muttered, then turned and walked back inside without another word. I laughed it off at the time. People have their quirks, right? But a few nights later, something happened that made me start paying attention. It was just after midnight when I stepped out onto my porch for some fresh air. The neighborhood was silent, the kind of heavy stillness where even the crickets had gone quiet. That's when I noticed a faint, flickering glow coming from the cracks around the edges of the shed door. It pulsed irregularly, like the unsteady beam of a dying flashlight, and I could have sworn I heard something else, a low, muffled sound, like movement. I stood there for nearly a minute, frozen in place, before finally retreating inside and locking the door. That was the first night the shed bothered me. Over the next few weeks, the shed became an obsession. Almost every night, I'd see that faint glow through the cracks, sometimes steady, sometimes flickering rapidly. Some nights, I'd hear soft scraping noises, like metal against wood. Other nights, I thought I heard whispers, faint, rhythmic, and impossible to make out. One Saturday afternoon, I finally worked up the courage to ask Thomas directly. He was outside watering his lawn, and I walked over, trying to sound casual. "Hey, Thomas, about that shed." He dropped the hose immediately, water splashing onto his boots. His face went pale. "Stay away from the shed," he said flatly. "Okay, but just stay away," he repeated, sharper this time, before turning and walking back inside. The door slammed shut behind him. That night, the glow returned, brighter than before. I stood by my bedroom window, peering through the blinds. The light seeped through the cracks like it was alive, pulsing faintly, and then I saw it. Someone was standing behind the shed. Not Thomas. Tall, thin, hunched forward slightly, like their back was twisted. They didn't move, didn't shift, didn't even seem to breathe. When I blinked, they were gone. The next morning, I walked to the fence and peered into Thomas's yard. The shed door had fresh scratches gouged deep into the wood, like something had clawed at it from the inside. That was when curiosity turned into fear. I bought a small security camera and mounted it on my back porch, angled toward Thomas's shed. If something strange was happening, I wanted proof. For 2 nights, the footage showed nothing unusual. No lights, no movement. I started thinking maybe I'd imagined it all. But on the 3rd night, at 3:18 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the live feed. The shed door was wide open, and something was crawling out. It wasn't Thomas. The thing moved awkwardly, almost like it didn't understand how to use its own limbs. Long, jerky motions, elbows bending at strange angles. I couldn't make out a face, just pale skin reflecting the camera's infrared light. The feed glitched suddenly, filling the screen with static. When it came back, the shed door was closed again, chains locked, tight as ever. I ran outside, heart pounding, but the yard was empty. The next morning, I checked the camera footage. The video from 3:18 a.m. was gone, deleted. By the final night, I hadn't slept in days. Every sound in the house made me jump. I kept my curtains closed, my lights on, and my phone in my hand at all times. At exactly 2:47 a.m., I woke to a faint glow bleeding through the blinds. I pulled them aside just enough to peek outside. The shed was lit up like a lantern. Bright, blinding light poured through the cracks in the door, and I could see the chains straining against something pushing from the inside. Then came the sound, metal rattling violently. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, barefoot on the cold grass. The glow stopped the moment I reached the fence. The rattling stopped. The yard went dead silent. I turned to go back inside. That's when I saw it. My back door, wide open. Fresh, muddy footprints led into my kitchen. I remember stepping inside, heart racing, gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. Then nothing. I woke up the next morning on the kitchen floor. The back door was closed. The footprints were gone. The shed door, locked tight. I moved out 2 days later. I still don't know what was inside that shed, and I don't want to. When my parents passed, the house went to my sister and me. It sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, a 2-story home with peeling white paint and a neglected backyard. My sister didn't want anything to do with it, so I moved in temporarily while we decided whether to sell it. The backyard was bigger than I remembered as a kid, dominated by an old oak tree near the fence line. At the top of that tree was the treehouse my dad built when we were young. It used to be our little world. Secret club meetings, card games, and late-night ghost stories whispered under flashlights. But now, it was rotting. The ladder was missing a few steps, boards warped from years of rain and sun. The windows were covered with grime, the door chained shut with a rusted padlock. On my first night back, I sat on the porch sipping tea, letting old memories wash over me. That's when I noticed a faint glow inside the treehouse. At first, I thought it was the reflection of a distant streetlight, but as I stared, I realized it wasn't steady. The light pulsed softly, as if someone were moving around with a flashlight inside. I grabbed the spare key my dad had left on his workbench and went to check, but when I reached the base of the tree, the lock was still in place. The door was tightly shut, and then I heard it. Soft, muffled voices. 2 of them, maybe 3, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite make out. I froze, straining my ears, holding my breath, but after a few seconds, the sound faded completely. I went back inside, locked the doors, and told myself I imagined it, But that night, I dreamed of the treehouse for the first time in years. By the third night, I was sleeping badly. Every creak of the house woke me. Every gust of wind outside made me sit up straight. And every time I glanced out the window, my eyes landed on the treehouse, standing dark and silent like a watchful shadow. Until it wasn't silent. Just past midnight, I heard it, the soft, uneven groan of wood under weight, like footsteps moving slowly across the treehouse floor. I forced myself to the window. The treehouse was dark, still, empty. Told myself it was just the wind. But the next morning, I noticed something strange at the base of the tree. Marbles. 4 tiny, glass marbles scattered on the ground below the ladder. I hadn't touched those things in years, and I certainly didn't put them there. The following night, I stayed up deliberately, lights off, watching from the porch. Around 1 in the morning, I saw something move, a figure climbing the ladder. Small, quick, and silent. I bolted outside. But when I reached the base of the tree and shined my flashlight upward, the treehouse was empty. The ladder was swaying slightly though, like someone had just gone up or down. The next day, I finally asked one of the neighbors about the house. Mrs. Garrison, who had lived 2 doors down for decades, lowered her voice when I mentioned the treehouse. "You don't know?" she asked, her face pale. "That's where it happened. 5 years ago, a little boy went missing. Last seen playing near that treehouse. They never found him." I didn't ask anything else. That night, I set up a small security camera pointing directly at the treehouse. I couldn't sleep, so I watched the live feed from my bed, phone clutched tight in my hand. At 3:07 a.m., the motion alert buzzed. I opened the app, expecting to see nothing, but there he was, a small boy, no older than 8, standing inside the treehouse, staring straight at the camera. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open, his eyes glassy. I bolted upright, ran downstairs, and stormed into the backyard with the flashlight in my shaking hand. The treehouse was empty, completely empty, but behind me, I heard the ladder creak, slowly, 1 rung at a time. But by the 4th night, I was unraveling. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that boy's face, pale and blank, staring straight into mine. I left every light on in the house, but it didn't help. I still woke to the sound of faint whispers outside my window. At 2:43 a.m., I saw it again, the glow from the treehouse. I stepped outside, flashlight trembling in my grip. The glow was steady this time, brighter than ever, pouring through the cracks in the wood like something was burning inside. I took 1 step toward the treehouse, then another. The whispers stopped, the glow went out, everything fell silent, and then, directly above me, I heard its soft breathing, slow and uneven, coming from the treehouse. I climbed the ladder, rung by rung, until my head reached the floorboards. I aimed the flashlight inside. The treehouse was dark, empty, silent. But when I turned back toward the house, my stomach dropped. My bedroom light was on, and someone was standing in the window. I had never cared much for gardening, but the new rental came with a small fenced backyard and a patch of green that begged for care. It wasn't much, just a square of grass, a couple of shrubs, and an aging wooden deck, but after years of living in cramped apartments, it felt like a little luxury. The first few days were uneventful. I'd sit outside in the evenings, sipping tea and listening to cicadas buzzing in the distance. Beyond the fence, a line of tall pine trees separated my property from the narrow service road behind it. The landlord told me nobody used the road at night. That was why I noticed the footsteps immediately. On the second night, I was sitting on the deck scrolling through my phone when I heard the crunch of gravel just beyond the fence. Slow, deliberate steps. I froze, listening. They stopped when I stood. I told myself it was probably an animal, a raccoon, or maybe a stray cat, but the sound had been too heavy for that. I peeked through one of the small gaps in the fence slats. Nothing but shadows. Still, something felt wrong. I double-checked the back gate lock before heading inside, making sure it clicked into place. That night, when I turned off the lights, I thought I saw movement through the curtains, a tall, dark shape standing just at the far end of the yard. I convinced myself it was just my reflection. By the 4th night, I was sleeping with my bedroom window cracked open to hear better. That was when I heard the sound of the gate creaking open again. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the back door. The gate was swinging slowly on its hinges. I knew I had locked it. My hands were trembling as I checked the latch. There was no damage, no sign of forced entry. It was as if someone had reached over from the outside and undone it. The next morning, I found muddy footprints near the deck steps. Large prints. Human. They led straight from the gate to where I usually sat at night, then vanished into the grass. I bought a motion-activated light from the hardware store that afternoon and installed it above the deck. That night, I watched from my bedroom window, waiting for it to go off. Around a.m. it did. The light flared brightly for a few seconds, then went dark. I rushed to the window, fumbling with the curtain, but the yard was swallowed in blackness. Again, I went outside the next morning expecting to find anything, but the grass was undisturbed. That was when I noticed the scratches, 3 deep, vertical grooves carved into the inside of my fence, right next to the gate. They were too uniform to be random damage. Whatever made them had done so deliberately, and they faced inward toward me. I stopped going outside altogether. The deck that once felt peaceful now looked like a stage, like someone was watching me perform from the shadows. Then came the breathing. It was around 3 in the morning when I woke up to it, soft but deliberate. Right outside my bedroom window, I lay frozen in bed, straining my ears. The steady, rhythmic inhale and exhale didn't belong to any animal I knew. I pulled the curtain back just a little, just enough to peek through. That was when I saw it. Someone, or something, was crouched by the tree line beyond the fence, facing my house. They didn't move, didn't react, didn't blink. I stared for what felt like a full minute before stepping away from the window, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. The next morning, I forced myself to inspect the yard. That's when I saw it carved into the back of the deck. Deep, jagged letters burned into the wood. Stay. It wasn't a warning. It was a command. That last night feels more like a dream than a memory now, but I know it happened. I nailed the gate shut with 3-inch screws and locked every door and window. My phone was charging next to me, the camera app open and ready. I was done hiding. At exactly 12:43 a.m., the motion light outside flared to life. I lifted my phone and hit record. At first, there was nothing but the soft glow of the deck and the swaying shadows of the pines. Then, something moved. A tall, impossibly thin figure stepped just far enough into the light for me to see its outline. It didn't move closer. It didn't run. It just stood there, staring. Then, the light went out. In the sudden darkness, I heard the sharp crack of splintering wood. The gate. Something had broken it from the outside. I called 911 with shaking hands. 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes, searching the yard with flashlights. They found no footprints, no broken boards, no scratches. The gate was still locked. The recording on my phone, however, shows something I can't explain: the tall figure standing motionless at the edge of the deck, seconds before everything went black. I moved out 2 days later. The landlord called me last week to ask if I had done something strange to the motion light. He said it won't stop turning on by itself, always around midnight. I didn't have an answer for him.